It's hard to explain the feeling that hits you when a show you followed for over a decade suddenly turns into something that feels off. Not dramatic, not emotional, but dishonest. And for many of us watching Sister Wives this season, that moment came the second TLC aired. Kody Brown sitting around a fire talking about how he wished he'd done things differently with his son Garrison after Garrison had already died. It wasn't just awkward. It wasn't just poorly timed. It felt like a cover-up, like grief was being used for a storyline. If you're here because that recent episode left you unsettled, if you felt anger, sadness, confusion, or even betrayal, you're not alone. Hit subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss what's coming, because we need to talk about what was shown, what wasn't, and why it matters. This story isn't just about grief. It's about control, about how someone's existence can be erased from a narrative while the one who turned away is handed the spotlight. It's about what was left behind. It's about who was left behind.
Sister Wives Kody and Robyn's cold reaction to Garrison's death. Astonished face truth revealed in new episode. As this season unfolded, something started to feel off. Episode after episode, the Brown family crumbled further in front of us. But one voice was missing. Not low in the background, missing. Garrison. He wasn't just absent. He was erased. No name, no mention, no presence. For fans who watched him grow up, who knew his dry humor, his loyalty, his quiet determination, it was disorienting. There were birthdays, tough conversations, family gatherings, and not once did his name come up. This wasn't some minor side character being phased out. This was a son. A brother. A soldier. Someone who had built his own life, served his country, and had been trying to rebuild himself after years of emotional fallout from the family's collapse. And yet, on screen? Silence. And viewers noticed. Fast. Comment sections lit up with confusion, questions, concern. Where was Garrison? Why was no one mentioning him? Why did his absence feel intentional? Then the news broke. Garrison had died. And everything shifted. The silence, in hindsight, became chilling. And then came the text, his last message, sent to his father, Kody, and a few family members and crew. It read, "I want to hate you for the good times, but I can't. I miss those days." A final message. Raw. Heartbreaking. A reaching hand that went unanswered. Kody never replied. Days later, Garrison was gone. For many of us, that text changed everything. It reframed the entire season. The silence wasn't just neglect, it felt like a choice. A deliberate effort to downplay a person who had spoken out. Who had distanced himself. Who had called out the very dynamics now being spun into a redemption arc. And when the show finally acknowledged Garrison's death, the handling left people stunned. The editing was cautious, careful, almost sanitized. Was this real grief? Or a reworked storyline? Because it didn't feel like a tribute. It felt like damage control. Instead of focusing on the ones who had been there, his siblings, his mother, those who stayed in touch, the spotlight was handed to Kody. Suddenly, the season's tone shifted. We saw Kody, quiet by a fire pit, talking about time, regret, healing. A father, we were told, reckoning with his mistakes. But it didn't feel like accountability. It felt like a performance. And that fire pit scene? It wasn't filmed when they wanted us to believe it was. Garrison passed in the winter. There was snow. That fire pit scene, no snow, no urgency. Just clean faces and controlled emotion. Filmed after. Scripted. Staged. Framed to look like real-time grief, when it was anything but. That kind of emotional manipulation, those sleight-of-hand edits, feel disrespectful. Not just to viewers, but to the people actually grieving off-screen. Janelle. Christine. Garrison's brothers and sisters. The people who called him texted him, loved him. They weren't given carefully edited moments or emotional spotlights. They were given silence or a passing mention. Meanwhile, Kody was handed a platform. Given space to reshape the story. Reframe the pain. Rewrite the narrative. And Robyn? Always beside him. Steady. Supportive. Feeding into this version of events where they were victims, not of circumstance, but of everyone else's choices. As if they hadn't pulled away. As if they hadn't dismissed those trying to speak up. And viewers saw through it. Online discussions, reaction videos, comment threads, they were all filled with people calling it out. Saying the grief felt off. That it didn't match the story we knew. That what we were watching wasn't mourning. It was marketing. Because here's the truth, Kody made no visible effort to reconnect with Garrison before the end. So why now? Why this storyline? Why is the one who ignored the last text now being painted as the father reckoning with loss? Meanwhile, Janelle didn't need editing tricks to show her heartbreak. She didn't need a monologue or a manufactured moment. Her grief was in her eyes. In her voice. In every pause. Every crack. She didn't need to say everything, it was already there, between the lines. Janelle spoke honestly, not to perform, but because the truth mattered. She talked about Garrison's long struggle with depression and anxiety, how the isolation during the pandemic deepened his pain, how his drinking escalated as the emotional weight became too much. She, along with Hunter and Logan, was constantly checking in on him. They weren't just family, they were a lifeline. Present. Aware. Trying. On the night before it happened, Janelle had been on the phone with Garrison for hours. Holding space. Listening. That's what love looks like. That's what family is, not just blood, but effort. Presence. And when Gabriel, the brother who found Garrison, finally spoke, it was devastating. In just a few quiet words, he gave us a glimpse of who Garrison really was, kind, thoughtful, someone who put others at ease even while carrying his own pain. Then he said something that landed with the weight of years behind it. He called Garrison a true gentleman. To fans, that wasn't just a compliment. It was a direct, poignant statement. Because for years, we've heard Kody talk about raising gentlemen, chastising his sons for not being obedient enough, respectful enough. But here was Gabriel, the calm, grieving, honest, showing us what a real gentleman looked like. No theatrics. Just truth. Hunter, Logan, Madison, they weren't at the center of the episode, but their presence was unmistakable. Madison had tried to convince Garrison to leave Flagstaff, to move closer to her in North Carolina and away from the toxicity he was trapped in. His brothers kept tabs on him, checked in regularly, made sure he wasn't alone. They didn't just mourn him. They showed up for him in life, in death, and in memory. They didn't need scripted moments. They didn't need long monologues. Their love spoke through their actions, and through the quiet, heavy grief they carried on screen. Watching Janelle break down, hearing Gabriel's small, trembling voice, feeling Madison's quiet guilt, it was the most honest part of the episode. Because it wasn't about performance. It was about Garrison. But even then, even in that most sacred of spaces, Kody couldn't speak about who his son really was. No stories. No memories. Just vague regret. Just more I wish and I should have. It wasn't about Garrison, it was still about him. And then there was Robyn. For years, her presence has quietly, and sometimes not so quietly, widened the cracks in this family. And during this tragedy, her role became impossible to ignore. While the rest of the family grieved openly, raw, broken, shaken, Robyn remained still, detached. Her tears felt like obligation, not devastation. This isn't about how someone should grieve. Everyone processes loss differently. But grief that centers the mourner rather than the person lost? That's something else entirely. Robyn kept referring to Garrison as our son. And for many viewers, that was a painful stretch. Because anyone who's watched the show knows, she wasn't there for him. She didn't raise him. She didn't bond with him. In fact, she stood by as Kody pulled further and further away from his sons, backing his choices, supporting the divide, never bridging it. So to see her now claim emotional ownership over a child she barely acknowledged? It didn't sit right. Not with viewers. Not with the siblings. And you could feel it, the unspoken resentment in the room. Not dramatic. Not shouted. Just there. Heavy. Earned. Years of being pushed aside. Of watching their father build a life where they no longer had a place. Of being punished for standing up, for speaking out, for choosing independence. And who was always by Kody's side, reinforcing the distance? Robyn. She wasn't a bystander in this breakdown. She was part of it. Her support of Kody's strict pandemic rules drove a wedge deep into the family, a wedge that especially hurt the older boys. She didn't extend grace to the sons struggling with their father's absence. She reinforced the separation. Even in this moment, with Garrison gone, she still felt like a barrier between Kody and the children he left behind. Not a bridge. Not a comfort. And when the decisions were made after Garrison's death, the heartbreak deepened. Because the final choices didn't reflect love. They reflected control. Garrison was buried in Wyoming, near Kody's family, in land tied to his legacy, his past. And yes, Garrison was born in Wyoming. But he didn't live there. He didn't build his home there. He didn't serve there. He wasn't surrounded by love there. His story was in Flagstaff. In his own home. In the National Guard. In the laughter and struggle shared with the siblings and mother who showed up for him. Not Kody. Not Robyn. So when the burial happened on land that didn't reflect Garrison's life, the question wasn't hard to ask, who was this really for? Because it didn't feel like it was for Garrison. It felt like one last attempt by Kody to reclaim a narrative. To say, this was still my son. Even after pushing him away. After ignoring his final text. After letting silence grow between them until it was too late. And the ones who should have made the decisions? The ones who stayed up late talking to him, who offered him safe spaces, who checked in, who never gave up. Janelle, Gabriel, Madison, Logan, Hunter, they were sidelined. Again. TLC followed that version of the story like it was the only one that mattered. The redemption arc. The reframed father. The softly lit regrets. But real grief doesn't need camera angles. And real love doesn't need edits. Watching Janelle in those final moments, holding her pain, steadying herself, choosing silence where others might have screamed, was a different kind of heartbreak. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind that carries weight long after the cameras are gone. Because this wasn't just a loss. This episode can't just be wrapped up as another plotline. Garrison's death isn't a storyline, it's a tragedy. And what we watched wasn't just one person's grief. It was the grief of a fractured family, still gasping for air, still trying to be heard. While the cameras lingered on the man who chose silence when it mattered most, the deeper truth was hard to ignore. Kody Brown remains estranged from nearly all of Janelle's children. Gabriel doesn't speak to him. Hunter, Logan, and Madison, gone too. And Savannah? She won't even acknowledge him anymore. These aren't minor rifts. These are adult children drawing boundaries to protect themselves from pain. From betrayal. From years of being overlooked, pushed aside, and made to feel like they weren't enough. And here's the most devastating part, even after Garrison's death, even after the unanswered messages, the missed chances, the irreversible loss, nothing has changed. Kody's version of grief, the narrative TLC tries to wrap in soft music and bonfire confessions, doesn't land. Not with fans. Not with those who've followed this family for over a decade. And especially not with those who remember. We remember how he shut his sons out during the pandemic, accused them of being selfish, mocked their independence. We remember the Christmases they were excluded from. The birthdays missed. The dismissiveness. The RV jokes. The silent treatment. So now, watching Kody sit around a fire, saying he wishes he had more time, it doesn't hit the way they think it will. It doesn't feel redemptive. It feels hollow. Because real grief doesn't perform. Real grief knows your child's pain. Their dreams. Their fears. The names of the people who held them up when you wouldn't. And maybe that's the part that hurts the most, knowing Garrison, even in his darkest moments, was still reaching for connection. Still trying. Still remembering the good times with a father who had long stopped showing up. His final words, "I want to hate you for the good times, but I can't." That sentence wasn't just heartbreak. It was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd still be seen. But he wasn't. He was met with silence. No reply. No call. No change. And that's why this story matters. Not because it's on reality TV. But because it's real for so many families. Because too many kids grow up feeling invisible. Too many parents don't realize how much damage silence can do until it's too late. If you're a parent watching this, let it be a wake-up call. Show up. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. If you're a child who's been ignored, sidelined, or hurt, you're not alone. We see you. We believe you. And if you're a sibling holding everything together while no one's watching, we recognize your strength. Your grief. Your love. So let's not let this become another edited memory. Let's keep talking. Let's keep telling the truth. Let's hold space for the people who did show up, for Janelle, for Gabriel, for Madison, Logan, and Hunter. For Garrison. My name is Maya. This is TLC's next chapter, the honest one. If this story hit you the way it hit me, share your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk. Let's grieve together. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. Because these stories matter. And they deserve to be told without filters, without spin, just truth. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.